Hello and welcome. I am Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is set to meet US President Trump in Washington to discuss ongoing Iran negotiations following recent indirect nuclear talks in Muscat. Iran describes Oman-mediated indirect talks with the United States as a positive step towards nuclear negotiations, while emphasizing that it's a non-negotiable that talks will remain not on its missile program. Trump signs an order warning of new US tariffs on countries that continue to trade with Iran, citing a possible 25% rate. The move comes as US-Iran talks continue in Oman, with Trump restating of opposition to Iran nuclear weapons. Thousands gather in Islamabad to bury the 31 killed in suicide bombing at a mosque. Islamic State claims the attack as residents fear further violence. Millions of Japanese voters cast ballots in snap election called by Prime Minister Sani Takaichi, with polls suggesting her Liberal Democratic Party coalition could win a large majority despite criticism over economic impact of proposed tax cuts and subsidies. Thailand votes in a national election featuring a three-way contest among major political blocs, with coalition talks likely to follow. Hong Kong pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai will be sentenced on Monday, following his convictions under national security and sedition laws in a landmark case. Investigators examine a newly surfaced message in the search for the missing mother of US journalist Savannah Guthrie. Authorities say the message is being checked for authenticity as the search enters a sixth day. And for your top story this hour, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has expressed optimism for the resumption of talks with the United States in the near future. Speaking in an interview, Araghchi reiterated that any agreement with the US must acknowledge Iran's right to enrich uranium. He also stressed that Iran's missile and defense programs will not be part of the negotiations. The remarks come amid growing tensions and efforts to find common ground on nuclear issues. Both nations have been navigating complex diplomatic waters, and Araghchi's comments highlight Iran's firm stance on its defense capabilities. Listen in to what the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi had to say.
ما آماده رسیدن به یک توافقی که نسبت به غنیسازی در ایران اعتماد ایجاد بکنه هستیم. در این مورد مشکل نداریم، ولی اصل غنیسازی حتما باید پذیرفته بشه و مذاکرات ما دیروز حول و حوش همین مسائل بود. و من وقتی میگم شروع خوبی بود، یعنی میشه حساب کرد به این که این مذاکرات در همین جهتی که عرض کردم پیش بره. مسائل دیگه‌ای که شما گفتید، بحث موشک، بحث دفاع، موضوع دفاعی ما هست، بحث امنیتی ما هست، به هیچ وجه قابل مذاکره نیست، نه الان نه هیچگاه در آینده. ما میز مذاکره رو ترک نکرده بودیم که بخوایم بهش برگردیم. آمریکا بود که میز مذاکره رو بمباران کرد و فکر کردن که از طریق بمباران، از طریق حمله نظامی، از طریق عملیات تروریستی میتونن به اهدافشون برسن. اونها بودن که تنازل کردن و برگشتن به میز مذاکره، چون این موضوع هسته ایران فقط راه حل مذاکراتی داره.
We are now being joined by Matthew Vadum, an American journalist joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. Why is Iran so firm on its right to enrich uranium, and why is this point such a deal breaker in negotiations with the US?
Well, Iran views having the ability to enrich uranium as important because they need it to make nuclear weapons, which they would point at Israel and their enemies, possibly one day at the United States if they had the capability of delivering them to U.S. targets. So that is a part of Iran, an integral part of Iranian national defense, and part of its terrorism, part of its nuclear blackmail capabilities, which it would like to have in the future. The United States doesn't want Iran to have nuclear enrichment capabilities because they know it will lead eventually to Iran creating nuclear bombs. Iran is the leading government sponsor of terrorism in the world, and the United States wants to curb its authority in the world.
And can a nuclear deal realistically succeed if Iran is allowed to enrich uranium, and or does that fundamentally undermine a non-proliferation goals?
I would say it fundamentally, you put it exactly right. It fundamentally undermines the whole purpose of U.S. foreign policy and of American objectives in these negotiations. The U.S. does not want Iran developing nuclear weapons, so that is an important red line for the Trump administration. They're just not going to let Iran have the ability to do that, and I'm not sure why they're even discussing it. Maybe they hope that the Iranian authorities, that the mullahs will back down. But I don't see how they can. That is the essence of their state, of their government apparatus. I don't think they can function or will feel comfortable in the world not having the ability to enrich uranium, which will lead to creating nuclear bombs. Both sides are not going to budge on this, and yet they're talking, hoping something can be worked out. But I think this is just public relations window dressing. I don't think anything will actually be accomplished, though they might make headway on other issues. Although Iran has said it only wants to discuss its nuclear the nuclear issue, and I think the United States is pressing Iran on a whole host of issues, including its stance against regional allies of the United States, such as Israel, and Iran's ongoing crackdown on dissidents in that country, which has led to tens of thousands of people reportedly being killed by the authorities and by the Revolutionary Guard and Basiji militia in Iran.
And is Iran's instance, you just touched on it briefly there, on enrichment, is it more about national sovereignty and dignity, or is it about preserving strategic leverage in future negotiations?
I think to the Iranians, I think it's about both. They want to be able to preserve their ability in the future. It's been hampered by the United States attack on the nuclear facilities there last year, but they want to have that ability as leverage in the future against their rivals, and they also view it as an essential component of their national sovereignty. The Iranian, the mullahs who run the dictatorship in Tehran view Iran as an aspiring nuclear power, and I don't think they're going to be satisfied until Iran actually becomes one.
And what role do regional actors like Israel and the Gulf countries play in shaping US resistance to Iran's enrichment demands?
Well, some of them are supportive, and some of them are not. They're, countries like Qatar are not, pretends to be a friend of the United States, but isn't really, and is not really interested in U.S. Objectives. They're a pretty friendly. They're pretty friendly to jihadist interests, whereas countries like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are more, mellow, for lack of a better word. They're more willing to. I don't think they like Israel, but they're willing to tolerate Israel, for example, and they're much more willing to make deals with the United States than some of the other more militant countries are.
And what role do regional if a compromise is reached, what kind of monitoring or safeguards would be necessary to ensure Iran's enrichment program remains peaceful?
Well, there would have to be significant and fairly invasive monitoring and inspection protocols, which we did not have under administrations prior to President Trump. There was a deal that Iran made with then President Barack Obama, and it was hardly enforceable at all. And the Iranians were allowed to get away with a lot. They were not. You could have inspections. They could deny inspectors the right to do the inspections, and they were able. It's thought that they were able to hide a lot at that time. But I think if a new inspection agreement comes about, Iran is going to have to allow inspectors to inspect facilities, whenever they feel like it, without notice, so that they can't conceal any activities that may violate whatever peace agreement is reached.
Thank you, Matthew. Don't go too far, as we will be back with you very shortly. President Donald Trump says the United States is deepening security cooperation with Honduras after what he described as a very important meeting with President Asfura. Trump said both leaders agreed to work closely to counter cartels and drug trafficking networks, while also stepping up the deportation of illegal migrants and gang members from the United States. Furthermore, he said the talks covered broader issues, including trade and investment between the two countries. Trump added that if he looks forward to welcoming the Honduran president back to the United States soon, as both sides aim to strengthen their partnership. We are now being joined back by Matthew. Thank you so much for joining us back here on NewsX World. What does Trump's close personal and security partnership with Honduras signal about US priorities in Central America?
Well, I believe that Honduras is the only country in Central America where the United States actually has a military base. So in that sense, Honduras, or for that reason, Honduras is quite important to U.S. national security policy. And so it's not surprising that President Trump is nurturing a close relationship with the new president there, President Asfura. And, and they both have some similar backgrounds. Nasri Asfura, the new president of Honduras, was apparently in the construction business before he entered public life. And that's pretty similar to what President Donald Trump was doing before he decided to become a politician and run for office. Trump was in the real estate development business. A lot of overlap between that and construction. And so these gentlemen have a lot in common to begin with.
And can cooperation on cartels, drug trafficking and deportations actually improve regional security, or does it risk pushing problems further down the region?
Further down the road, I would say it does. That's a speculative point. I don't know that it would. I think one of the reasons that the United States is not so keen on allowing people from Honduras to enjoy TPS, temporary protected status in the United States, is because Honduras is now viewed as a safe country, that people don't have a legitimate fear of persecution if they return there. The U.S. policy regards Honduras as, as an okay country now, unlike, for example, Cuba, and they may send some Hondurans back, which I think makes some of the people in the Honduran government upset. But I think they view it as a cost of doing business with an important ally, with the world's only superpower.
And does Trump's open political support for strengthen bilateral ties, or does it raise concerns about US influence in Honduras domestic politics?
Well, Donald Trump has intervened in an unprecedented way, to my mind, in endorsing candidates around the world. U.S. presidents don't normally do that. Sometimes, they'll favor a certain candidate, they'll be friendly towards them, but Donald Trump has actually endorsed quite a few of them, and this is quite unusual. And I can see why people would say that amounts to the U.S. interfering in the affairs of other countries. I don't think too many other world leaders do that generally. This is President Trump's style. When he sees somebody he likes and he wants them to win, he endorses them, and oftentimes they do. It is pretty unusual, though, for him to do it beyond the borders of the United States. And I think there has been some blowback over that. There's been some resentment in various countries around the world over President Trump's doing that. Whether that's going to cause problems in, U.S. relations with various countries around the world is hard to say. But I think it makes them inclined to not believe that the United States is dealing fairly with all countries, that it's that expression they use in diplomatic circles, that the U.S. is not an honest broker. And I think it raises concerns that the U.S. is not an honest broker in diplomatic discussions, that it has an ulterior motive, and that it's not playing straight with countries.
And beyond security, how realistic is deeper US-Honduras cooperation on trade and investment, and who stands to benefit the most from it?
Well, it's very likely that relations will improve so that there's greater U.S. investment in Honduras. I think that the United States is already Honduras's #1 international trading partner. But if American businesses view Honduras as a good place to invest, a good place to set up businesses, I don't see why they wouldn't do that. Going against that, then you have pressure in the other direction, saying that U.S. businesses should be investing in America and not and not be going beyond their borders with their investments. So, there's kind of a political tug of war there, where U.S. businesses are damned if they do and damned if they don't.
Thank you, Matthew, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Polling stations have opened in Japan for snap elections in the lower house, with Prime Minister Sani Takaichi's Conservatives expected to secure a majority. Takaichi, Japan's first female Prime Minister, aims to push forward policies to strengthen the economic and military capabilities, especially amid rising tensions with China. Despite heavy snowfall affecting parts of the country, voters are casting their ballots. A strong result for Takaichi's coalition could lead to significant shifts in Japan's policies on security, immigration and defence, marking a pivotal moment for the nation's future. Let's listen in to what the voters had to say.
本当に物価がもうどれもこれも上がっていて、でも収入はそんなに上がってないので、やっぱり可処分所得が少なくなってるっていうところについて、その高市さんが責任ある積極財政というふうにいつも言っていて、それがいい方向に向かうかどうなのかがわからないんですけれども、やっぱりその積極財政を取ることでどうなるのか期待をしてみたいという思いで今日投票してきました。
初めての女性の総理がどのような実績を残していくのか、それにやっぱりちょっとでも、男性ですけれども手助けできればいいかなと思って、投票しました。
We are now being joined by Dr. Asthar Chadha, who's an Associate Professor of International Relations. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. What does this election say about the public support for Prime Minister Sani Takaichi and her leadership so far?
Well, wonderful to be back here on your channel. I see in general a lot of optimism around Prime Minister Sani Takaichi and her capability to continue to lead the country, whether it's in terms of economy or it's in terms of providing temporary relief. Because one of those voters that I was hearing the videos you played was complaining about the rise in living costs. But no subsequent rise in the wages, and that seems to be dominating the voters and their concerns at the moment. And looks like it's not only Sani Takaichi and the leading coalition, the LDP party together with the Japan Innovation Party. It's not about that coalition alone leading that reform or leading that agenda. If you look at their competitors, the Centrist Reform Alliance, for instance, they're also talking about affordability. The difference here is in what they are willing to provide to their voters, to make sure or to ensure that they don't have to spend too much. And if you look at Sani Takaichi's, or what we are, very interestingly calling it here as Takaichinomics, she's trying to push for more stimulus. She's trying to push for more temporary food tax exemptions. The coalition partner is also talking about cutting down on social security premiums, which, by the way, do take up a huge amount of the take-home pay that people take here at home, and making consumption tax on food zero. That would be a very, very major move if that happens. I don't know, exactly how they intend to fund this. There is very less clarity on that, because on one hand is the issue with voters and what amount of money they can take back home. On the other hand is how they're going to fund this debt. So the funding in the debt seems to be, at least for the voters at the moment who are struggling with rising inflation, less of a problem. I think that has been pushed out. The main political sort of contest here right now is on security, on people's economic security, and also on country's national security. And on those fronts, I see Prime Minister Sani Takaichi leading the LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, and hoping to secure more than 230 seats on their own, which again would be very, very exemplary, because that means together with the coalition with Japan Innovation Party, they might very well reach over 300 seats. And if they do that, they might not need anybody else to come on board with them. They are going to have a very smooth time in terms of legislations. They're going to be able to control all parliamentary committees, so on and so forth. So I think they're looking at a huge victory, and there has been a shift in the way coalitions have worked in Japan, and this particular election will be a test for this new alliance that has formed between LDP and Japan Innovation Party.
And as you just said, there are some issues that people are thinking about with cost of living, etc. What do you think the biggest one is on the voters' mind? Do you think it's the economy, security, or cost of living?
I would definitely say cost of living tops, people's anxieties at the moment. I mean, as I was mentioning, in general, Japan has not had a very high rate of voting, but people around me and people that I've talked to since morning, almost everyone has cast their vote, despite it being a very, very snowy morning here in Japan. But that does show that people are very concerned in general about which direction the country is taking. Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi, for me, or for the voters, let's say, does not only represent a possibility of alleviating all of these just pure talk that was happening in politics in terms of providing relief to their voters to be able to have better affordability. But she's also coming with this two-pronged agenda of making sure that security and defense do in some way dominate people's minds. But if I read the voters' minds correctly, security and defense have been important, but they definitely are not the top of the list. They probably would be secondary. The major concern here is the economy.
Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. It's been lovely speaking to you. 4 Indian medical students were injured in a brutal knife attack at a dormitory in UFA, Russia. The Indian embassy in Moscow confirmed the incident and assured that officials from the Indian consulate in Kazan, around 400 kilometers away, are on their way to offer assistance. The attack occurred at the State Medical University dormitory, where a teenager armed with a knife targeted several students. Local reports indicate that at least 6 individuals, including 2 police officers, were injured. The attacker resisted arrest, injuring 2 officers before turning the knife on himself. The identities and nationalities of the students involved have not been disclosed, and an investigation is underway. Nearly 900 Google employees have signed an open letter urging the company to be more transparent about how its technology is used by US immigration enforcement agencies. Workers express alarm that Google continues to provide cloud services and other support to agencies like ICE and CBP, even as recent federal operations have become more aggressive and resulted in civilian deaths. Several employees have said that they feel misled about Google's involvement in government surveillance and enforcement work, arguing the company is drifting from its stated values. The letter also criticises leadership, including CEO Sundar Pichai, for not clearly addressing the extent of these government partnerships. Signatories call for Google to withdraw from all Department of Homeland Security related work, protect employees from immigration enforcement, and hold an all-hands meeting to address their concerns. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.